Haver, I'm so excited to have you with us today on this show, and I'll talk a little bit about why I invited you a little bit later. But before we even get started, I wanted to ask you, how did you end up doing what you do today? And people heard that introduction of what you do and what you focus on, but there's always a backstory, and we hear all these accolades, but I like to hear about the person behind all this. So can you just tell us a little bit about your journey and how you got here?
So I started out as a generalist, as a general OBGYN practitioner, the same woman you would have gone to deliver your babies and do well woman care. And when I first got out into practice, I was 34. So I started med school at 26, residency at 30, finished my training at 34. And when I got out, I was bringing in new patients who were basically pregnant and having babies. And I had my second baby at 35. And so like I was kind of aging with my patients. They were, some were younger, but I began to notice through the years of practice that my patients who were approaching, into their 40s, approaching their 40s, into their 50s, were all beginning to complain of certain symptoms, especially weight gain. Weight gain seemed to be the pain point. And I was telling them what I had been taught to tell them. And it's a little bit embarrassing for me, but, work out more, eat less. And this is just a part of life. Welcome to menopause. Like all of the things that people on social media are coming back to me with what healthcare providers are telling them in response to their, hey, help me. Something's not right. I don't feel right. I was saying myself, there was this undercurrent of maybe it's in her head. Like if you don't have a clear answer, if she doesn't fit into the box you were taught, and there's many problems with the box was developed by men, for white men, and it's like women as a whole have just kind of, if we don't fit into the men's medical box, we are treated as atypical or abnormal. And, this was kind of making sense to, I'm like, wait, we're doing this wrong. Wait, they're all complaining of this. Wait, I'm having it happen to me. My own perimenopause journey and my own realization that I don't know enough. I'm required to read several articles every year to continue my board certification and take quizzes and these are like groundbreaking or new guidelines put forth. And there was nothing on menopause, almost nothing. Tons on fertility, getting pregnant, staying pregnant, all important stuff, pediatrics, oncology, all the aspects of women's health. But menopause was just getting such the short end of the stick. And it really sadly took me going through my own journey and realizing there is a huge gap here to begin to turn my attention towards, wait a minute. So for me, what began as a weight issue exploded into a general menopause issue. And I would go back into 2017 when I began this kind of shift. And I wish I knew then what I knew now about, we've got to stop focusing on that number on the scale. It doesn't equal our health, but that's where I would wake up every morning and get on the scale and set my tone for the day on how I felt about myself, my self-worth. Skinny was currency. Right. Skinny was internal currency to me, and being a thin person was something that I had, felt good about. And nothing could be further from traditional practice to focus on the Galveston diet and developing this wellness protocol for women in midlife using nutrition and lifestyle. But Jen, the conversation kept going back to people wanting to know, followers, patients, what's going on with hormone therapy? What's going on with the latest data? Why does everyone tell me I'm going to get cancer? Why am I so fearful of this? And so that just kind of took off on its own on social media for me. And the more I dug and the more I listened, the more I found other people who were focusing on menopause care, the more I realized this is where I need to be.
Yeah. Well, I can't tell you how excited I am to talk to you today because, well, first of all, I experienced exactly what you talked about myself, right? So after I turned, it was probably around 45 where, I've always been into fitness. I've always been really healthy. I try to focus on that. Have always maintained my weight, and what I was eating wasn't working anymore. So I was cutting out all these foods and cutting out calories and doing all this stuff, and it still wasn't working. And I was able to maintain my weight, but I was starving myself. And I was like, there's something about this hormonal aspect of this that no one is talking about. Later, when I discovered you, I thought, oh my gosh, somebody is talking about this. Somebody gets it. Somebody is really, really focused on hey, the bodies are not the same. And there are some hormonal changes that impact that. But also, just so you know, I work with a lot of women that are executives. They're, around the ages of 40 plus. And one of the things they're
Right.
constantly talking about is this notion of, oh my gosh, weight gain. Oh my gosh, what's happening to me? All of these symptoms I'm having, but especially the weight gain piece. And not knowing how to address it. And I thought, wow, what a perfect person to bring on the show today, because I think you kind of feel the pain, but you also get it in a different way. And you have some incredible tips to offer. So let me ask you this. So most of these women that I'm talking about are, 40 plus, and they're experiencing this weight gain and they're feeling misunderstood. Talk to us a little bit about why and what's going on and what your thoughts are on that.
What is happening is, with no changes in diet or exercise, as a woman goes through the menopause transition, she is beginning to, she will have an increase in her lipids. She will have a acceleration of the degradation of her muscle mass. She will have an increase in fat mass deposition. And the places where she gains fat will change, will move to the abdominal cavity. And this all together leads to the number on the scale going up. But beyond that, as you lose muscle mass, your basal metabolic rate decreases. So the tricks and things that you did in the past to get that, I can't tell you, it happened to me. It happened so thousands of times I've heard this. I went back to the things that always worked before, and they're just not working anymore. And the thing is, you are changing internally, which these same habits are probably not serving you anymore. I experienced the same weight gain, and my tummy was getting bigger. I was having this belly out of nowhere, and I'd always been kind of a stick. I never really, I was kind of straight. And all of a sudden I was looking pregnant again, and I was like, I even went and had an ultrasound. They're like, is there something in there? No, it's just fat. And, so, okay, I'm not dying, but something's going on. And so I had gone through the death of my brother, at the same time had gotten off of my birth control pills because I was in my late 40s and wanted to see kind of where I was at. So I was going through full menopause. I was fully menopausal when I got off. Didn't know. I skated through most of perimenopause, being treated with birth control pills for another condition. And so here I am, no estrogen on board, grieving my brother terribly, falling onto really bad habits with alcohol and processed carbohydrates, goldfish crackers, to be honest. And, to soothe myself at night while I'm dealing with grief and his loss. And, knew that I'd fallen off the nutritional bandwagon, knew that, I wasn't doing the right stuff for my body, but I couldn't help it. So then, a few months go by and the grief is lifting and I'm feeling like, okay, it's time to get you back, time to get your healthy habits back. So I went back to all the things I used to do, working out and counting calories, and it stopped working. So, and then I would double down. I would do 2 a days at the gym. I was calorically restricting to dangerous levels. It was defining my day. I was getting up in the middle of the night to pee and then weighing myself, like all negative stuff. I wasn't sleeping. The hot flashes were horrific. Like all of this is happening at once. And my belly's just getting bigger and bigger. And so, I'd lose a pound or two and then it would just I'd have one off day and it'd come right back on plus a pound. I was just feeling like crazy. And I'm like, why is it that in 2 days I can gain 5 pounds, but I can't lose, in 2 days I can't lose 5 pounds? Like, help me with the math here. My husband worked overseas at the time and he was leaving for a long trip. And I said, when you get back, in a month or whatever, you'll have the wife you deserve. And he just kind of was like, okay, you're obsessed. This is not healthy. Your girls are watching. My daughters were high school and middle school at the time. And he's like, you're modeling behavior for them. That is not you. If you could see yourself, and it really kind of hit home. So I decided, okay, I can't keep doing this. It's not working. And so I called still being type A, I called the PhD nutritionist at the university that I used to work with and was like, what is going on in menopause? Why am I suffering in all my patients and I'm not helping them in calorie? And they said, listen, where I worked did a lot of work on the elderly. So they had all this data on people in their 60s and 70s. And elderly in medicine is over than 65. I'm not trying to offend anyone and call you elderly. It's just a medical.
Yeah.
And I
And
got in
on the
trouble
news too, right? So you see,
elderly.
here's this elderly woman.
So I hope when I get to 65, that I'm kicking butt like I am. But so they had data from there, but they said what we know is happening is inflammation markers are going up. Inflammation's going up. We have this new deposition of belly fat. And I go, well, yeah, my belly's bigger. They go, no. We're talking about the intra-abdominal fat, visceral fat. This is very different. So I got this whole education on what visceral fat is, how it affects the body, inflammation, and then how menopause might be related to all of that. I'm like, no one's really talking about this. So I had to make a lot of inferences. So I said, okay, let me figure out something to lower inflammation using nutrition and what that's going to look like. And so that's kind of how the plan of the Galveston diet came about, where I was looking for, concrete ways. So anti-inflammatory nutrition, like what foods do we know naturally fight inflammation? They are packed with fiber, packed with micronutrients, packed with anthocyanins and different phytochemicals that are inflammation fighters. What foods do we know keep the gut microbiome healthy? And what foods do we know don't do those things, and actually harm them? Then I looked at Mark Mattson's data from the NIH, looking at neuroinflammation and Alzheimer's and dementia, and what nutritional strategies they use. And that's where I got excited about fasting. He does a lot of work on intermittent fasting, not for weight loss, but more for lowering inflammation. I thought, okay, not so much a fad. I'd heard of it, but let me consider this. And then I looked at, the sugar addiction so many of us have, self-soothing. For me, it's more salt, but at so many of my patients, so many of my friends, sugar. I'm like, what can we do? How can we turn this train around and get them to stop self-soothing, stop using sugar as a crutch? You keep some in your diet, but not this heavy reliance, looking at what typically Americans eat. So all of that got put together into the Galveston diet. And it, in medicine, diet is a pattern of eating. It's not a fad. I don't say, are you on a diet? I say, what is your diet? When I talk to a patient. And so I was just prescribing it to my patients. It was a little back of the envelope thing I'd put together, and here's some ideas and try this and no. And it was working beautifully in me. My girlfriends all wanted to do it. My patients were doing well. They were telling their friends. And then I talked about it on social media one day and it exploded. Yeah. So that's kind of how the Galveston diet and all of this nutrition.
Think about that. Such a gap, right? And so you also have the credibility, right? You're not just someone talking about it. Also, what I find is, nothing against fitness trainers, but there are a lot of fitness trainers out there who are stuck on one diet and don't really understand all of this body changes.
And they're just limited by their education and their training. They're taught, and they don't really understand how a woman's body works, especially women in midlife and menopause. Sure, this works great for a 25-year-old male athlete. Right. It's amazingly well. Calories in, calories out, protein loading, all those things that they do. But you can't transpose that data. We are not little old men. We are menopausal women in our menopause journey, and those things don't apply to us. Don't even talk to me about that. You didn't do any studies on us. So, and all I do is look at studies done in women our age.
Yeah. So when you talk about, a couple of things I want to clarify. First of all, we've got to talk about the Galveston diet book, right? So because we'll talk about that a little bit and what the premise is. I'm going to encourage everybody to get the book, but also just a little bit about, okay, so what are some things that we should get from? Well, let's go ahead. Let's talk about that first.
So when I was giving the program away on social media, just, I was running these little test groups. I had no idea what I was doing. I was just playing. It was a passion for me. It was fun. I was going back to school to get enrolled. I was getting certified in medical nutrition. And so I was just testing the plan out with bigger groups across the US in these Facebook groups. And then some savvy entrepreneurs, physician entrepreneurs were like, look, you really should turn this into some kind of a business. Sell it as a book, do whatever. I had no idea how to publish a book, but I knew that because of how I was presenting the information on I tried an ebook. That was a disaster. And one said, try an online course. Another physician said, try one of those online courses. And I was like, what is that? So it was like Udemy and Teachable. And for whatever reason that day, I picked Teachable. And we launched as an online program in September 2018 on Teachable. And it just exploded because I was able to upload videos where I walked people through the journey, talked to them, through video education on the science of the program and why it might work for them. And we had reached about 70, 80,000 students who had enrolled in the online program. And then Random House Publishing approached me about writing the book. And so the program was there, and I really had to think about a book format because I didn't know if it would undermine we'd built a business. I'd hired employees. We were doing great. Why would I bring in a book and pull people away from how I'm paying my employees? And, but, we thought about it for several months. Then my dad passed away. Another brother died. My dad passed away. I had really kind of focused on my family. And then we said, okay, let's do it. It'll broaden our horizons. And so I was able to incorporate more menopause information in the book. And I think that's what's really resonating with people, because we have so many stories of students and followers talking about their menopause journey and the frustrations. I touch on hormone therapy. It's just kind of a high level view of menopause, but that is really resonating with people. So we have a new book coming out. It's going to be called tentatively The New Menopause, and it's going to be a modern guide to menopause. Not only, we've covered the lifestyle and nutrition end, but this is medications, all the different symptoms you may not realize are associated with menopause, and something you would hand to a 30-year-old and be like, get ready, this is coming. It's like what to expect when you're never going to expect.
No, that's again, it's interesting. We're finally starting to have these conversations because it's been a taboo, and it's also been ignored that this is actually happening and that there must be something wrong. And if we do talk about it, then there's something, either women are saying, oh, well, that makes me past my prime or that makes me old. But talk about, so perimenopause is what we're talking about. When does that usually start? I mean, it's not,
no. And so many of your listeners will have been told by their healthcare providers, you're too young. So what they're saying is you might be a bit young for full menopause. So full menopause, the end of your ovaries, okay, where you're never going to have another period, your ovaries have stopped producing estrogen, is one day after your last menstrual period, okay? And
that's usually around
that at day 51, okay? But 45 to 55 is still under the normal curve. All right. Perimenopause, which is you don't just go from full speed to stop, right? We have a transition period, the menopause transition or perimenopause. That can take 7 to 10 years. So do the math. It is completely reasonable for a woman between the ages of 35 and 45 to begin to experience some of the symptoms associated with her menopause journey. Our biodiversity is insane here because we have estrogen receptors in every organ system of our body. We have alpha receptors, beta receptors. They act differently. We have different levels of receptors based on our genetics. And so it's really fascinating. And medicine hates this. We like a checklist, right? And sure, 85% of us will have hot flashes, but what about the joint pain, the dental changes, the brain, and you have lungs, kidneys, heart, all with estrogen receptors, palpitations, changes in your EKG, lipid changes from your liver. It's unbelievable. We're just at the tip of the iceberg where we're discovering all of the symptoms that actually can be associated with menopause. Frozen shoulder, all these musculoskeletal joint pains. The orthopedists are going crazy right now. And so all of this new data is being turned out where people are like, wait a minute, maybe it's not all in her head. Maybe it's menopause.
Right. No, and then that's terrific. And I think we're finally having the conversations. Now, what do you think the differences are between men and women? Because some people will say, well, that's just a product of aging, right? And so what are your thoughts on that?
So it is it is difficult to untangle what is aging. So weight gain is aging, right? The number on the scale. But what's happening internally is menopause. The loss of muscle mass, the shifting of, fat to the viscera, that's purely hormonal. Okay. For men, they peak of their testosterone level at 19 average. Okay. And then it is just a very slow decline to stabilization at 40. And from 40 till death, they basically have the same levels of testosterone level. Now, between men, those levels are pretty variable. Some men have lower testosterone, but you're not going to see this continuous decline. There's nothing a man does. We have complete dysfunction and dissolution of our entire reproductive endocrine system by the age of 51. Okay. That does not happen to a man. So
that's a big difference.
A big difference. Our gut microbiome changes, approaches that of a man. Our risk of cardiovascular disease approaches that of a man. Our risk of stroke approaches that of a man. Our risk of autoimmune disease skyrockets in the perimenopause transition. This does not happen to men. They do not see an age-related increase like we do, you know. So the biggest difference is that our ovaries completely shut down by the average age of 51, and their gonads will continue to produce testosterone until they die.
Wow. Yeah. Well, that's a huge difference. I mean, just that in itself. Now talk to us. So Dr. Haber, you're talking about so many things that we could talk here all day. Talk to us a little bit. I know people are chomping at the bit. So what do we do with the diet? What are some tips? I mean, of course, you know, people will get the book, but just what are some of
my top tips?
Top level tips. Yeah.
High level. Number one, make sure you're getting enough fiber in your diet per day, a minimum of 25. Most of us, without paying attention to it and just kind of eating what you think is healthy, will only get about 12 grams per day. You really, really have to work to get the full 25. And for so many of us, it is really adding in the legumes, the leafy greens, the veggies, the fruit, the nuts and seeds. So many of those things are higher in fat. And that is something we're terrified of for no reason other than that is what popular culture, at least when we were coming up in the world, low fat, no fat, no. That's all that was a fad. But we can't, it's hard to let that go. I remember looking at a handful of nuts or an avocado and thinking, oh my God, that's so high in fat. Oh my God, you know, the Galveston diet is a fat rich, delicious fat that keeps you full. That's healthy. It's good kinds of fat.
Good kind of fat.
That are packed with other nutrients and fiber and, the slow absorption of these things and keeping you full and satisfied and making those hormones, the leptin and ghrelin and insulin and cortisol work for you instead of against you and putting you in these patterns of behavior that lead to overeating and, emotional eating, et cetera.
And what about sugar?
So sugar. So many of my followers are, oh my God, I'm addicted to sugar. And I'm leading a challenge right now, a free challenge. So at the date of recording this, that we have 100,000 people signed up for. And so it's a belly fat challenge, how to decrease visceral fat. So fiber goal is one and an added sugar goal is another. So sugars found in the whole keto movement kind of villainized sugars overall. We need carbohydrates to live. It's important. You can't go carb for very long. Your body doesn't like it. You'll see things in your blood work you don't like. When you look at sugars, you need to look at total sugars and added sugars. And added sugars are the sugars added in cooking and processing and alcohol. And so keeping that less than 25 grams per day, women who do that in perimenopause and menopause routinely will have significantly less belly fat than women who don't. So that's not saying you can never have a cookie or a soda or whatever, but you have a budget, and women who consistently hit that 25 or less grams per day of added sugars do well. That's 4 tablespoons. But when you think about that, Dr. Pepper has 6. You may wipe out your entire added sugar budget with 1 soda.
Yeah. And what about processed foods? What about processed foods? I mean, obviously, I'm sure that's the villain in this.
Yeah. And processed foods have so many kind of ticks against them that make them inflammatory. They have lots of added sugar typically. They have lots of preservatives. They have lots of simple, like white flour. They've been stripped of nutrients to make it more palatable. So many chemicals and things added to them to give them longer shelf life and to make them pretty and to, and so in moderation, very low doses, learning to meal prep is so important, not to rely on convenience foods. If you're in a pinch, looking at some of the meal delivery services, with better options is really going to be the way to go.
Yeah. And that it's hard, it's interesting because I think we've been socialized, as you mentioned, the calories, right? So it's all about the calories. And so
we don't count calories in Galveston diet.
Oh. Shocker, right? So yeah, thank you for sharing some of those. So finally, we've talked about the losing weight. What do you think if you were to give your best advice to women who are going through this, anywhere from the ages, as you mentioned, from 35 on, that are going through some of these changes, that are feeling differences in their weight, that are not feeling as well? What advice would you give them? First on weight loss, second on everything else?
So number one, stop using the scale as a measure of your health. I know it's what we were taught to do. It's what we were taught in medicine to do, but it's really, really wrong. We are more than just that number. And it's a very poor indicator of chronic health. We have much better measurements, the waist to ratio, muscle mass, et cetera. Move your body in a way that brings you joy. We need to do cardiovascular activity to keep our heart strong. It also works great on our mental health, and do strength training to keep our bones and muscles strong. Think about what your goal is. Who do you want to be in 20 years? Do you want to be climbing a mountain? Do you want to be, my big focus is I don't want to be a burden on my children. I don't want my children to have to feel that they have to interrupt their lives, their plans, their goals, their dreams to come and take care of me for years of chronic disease. That would be the biggest failure of my life. And and I'm watching people do it. I've had to do some of it with my own family. And I don't want to do that to my kids. I want them in their 40s to be raising their kids, taking care of their family, doing their thing, and not worried about me. And in order to make that happen, given my genetics, the decisions I make today are going to determine that. Now, I don't have a crystal ball. Who knows what's going to happen? But my best chance of reaching that dream is to take care of myself and get these habits down right now that I can sustain for the rest of my life.
Yeah. I mean, I think that what you just said is just like such a nugget of wisdom there. And I think I
never said anything about looking good in a bikini.
Right. That's what I was going to say. Exactly. Yeah. It really is. And it's a process, and it's a choice every moment is what I'm hearing you say. And I totally believe that as well. But what do you say to people who are like, well, I'm too busy. I'm just so overwhelmed. I have so many other things going. I don't take time for this. What would you say to them?
You have to put on your oxygen mask first before you can help everybody else. Everybody gets a pass when you're in survival mode. And if you're in survival mode, God bless you. Okay. But if you've built your life so that every moment is a survival moment, you need to take a step back. You are going to burn out, and you're going to end up, nothing is going to matter to you when you're sick with chronic disease. And you have an opportunity right now, and your children are watching, and you are laying out expectations for them to live a life that they cannot sustain if you don't show them that you can make yourself a priority.
I mean, what a wonderful note to end on. I mean, that is it, is making yourself a priority. And I think that is a lesson in itself, Dr. Haber. I think that right there is a perfect ending to this. So thank you so much for spending time with us today. I think you have just imparted us with so much wisdom, but also such practical advice. And I am going to encourage, we will put the link to your book, and then looking forward to your new book as well, because this is such an important topic. Thank you.
Thanks so much for having me.